Pablo Picasso has generated perhaps more discussion and more attention than any artist ever. And now Picasso is coming to San Francisco. You can see more than 100 of his masterpieces from the permanent collection at the Musée National Picasso in Paris in a rare exhibition here at the De Young Museum.
He said, everything you can imagine is real. His art proved those weren't just words. Spencer Christian travels in the footsteps of the revolutionary, the pioneer, Picasso, life, work, and legacy.
Welcome to Paris, France, perhaps the world's foremost city of art, beauty, culture, and romance. And Paris was the longtime home of Pablo Picasso, one of the world's most famous and most influential artists. And this is a Musée Picasso, which contains many of the master's works. In the next half hour, we'll take an intimate look at the life and the genius of Picasso.
Picasso's accomplishment as an artist is really extraordinary. By all accounts, he's the most influential artist of the 20th century. He himself invented several new art forms. Cubism, he was a major contributor to Surrealism, but he also really challenged viewers to help complete the work. This is one of his great innovations. He created a whole new vocabulary for art, and ultimately that's his greatest contribution, is to redefine the very nature of art itself.
That statement speaks volumes about Pablo Picasso's place in art history. Consider this. A significant portion of all art from the 20th century could not have existed without Picasso.
Picasso, of all the great artists, is perhaps the most protean in his ability to both invent new styles, but also move on. He was a great adherent of exploration and innovation and discovery. The thing he always resisted was being tied to a single movement or a single group.
Picasso demonstrated exceptional artistic talent even in his early childhood. And he had the good fortune of being born into just the right family to cultivate that talent.
The most important influence for Picasso as an artist was his own father, who was an artist himself. And very interestingly, Picasso tells a story that his talent was so extraordinary. He once said, I could paint like Raphael when I was a child. It's not actually true when we look at those paintings, but he definitely thought he could. And he tells an amazing story where he said his own father gave up art and handed over his brushes and palette to the young boy genius. And even though we now know that story is not true, it suggests the sort of sense of self that Picasso had at a very early age.
Picasso's father was the primary influence on his son's artistic vision, yet their styles could not have been more different.
Picasso's father absolutely worked in a more academic tradition. He painted realistic paintings. He also painted subjects that were subjects and themes that Picasso himself liked. His first painting, as Picasso as a young child of 10, was a bullfight. So how appropriate that the Spaniard Picasso should choose the national pastime for his first painting. And as viewers know, that becomes one of his favorite subjects throughout his life.
Picasso was an incredibly worker, always working, always trying to go further, always aware about his own capacity, ability, and this wonderful creativity.
Pablo Picasso's life began in the city of Malaga, Spain. He was the eldest child, born October 25, 1881, to a middle-class family. As a mere teenager, Picasso suffered a tragic loss when his sister, Conchita, died at the age of 7 from diphtheria. It was a traumatic experience, which would leave a lasting mark.
Picasso actually promised God when his sister was ill that if she lived, he would give up art. This is an extraordinary sacrifice on the young artist's part, but in fact she died. He never recovered from it completely, and when he had a child with Marie-Thérèse Walter in the 1930s, he gave her his sister's name.
After his sister's tragic death, Picasso's family moved to Barcelona, where he began to thrive as an artist. At the age of 15, he enrolled in the country's foremost art school, Madrid's Royal Academy of Fine Arts of San Fernando.
His mother used to say that every profession he would have chosen, he would have been the best. And he knew, I guess, since he was a little boy, that he had this power.
Picasso could accurately be described as the Shakespeare of the art world, not only because he was so prolific, created so many works. The Musée Picasso alone has 3,600 works by him, but also because, in a way, just as Shakespeare made English a global language, one could argue that in the 20th century, Picasso made his vocabularies Cubism, Surrealism, global languages as well. If you were an artist maturing in the 20th century, you had to learn to speak Picasso. And you had to learn to either embrace him, fight him, reject him, or all the above, but you couldn't ignore him.
In 1900, Picasso made his first trip to Paris, which at that time was the art capital of Europe. During much of the early 20th century, he divided his time between Barcelona and Paris.
He began to be a great painter when he arrived in Paris. And it was not just like in one moment. He had to go and come back, go back, come back, because it was perhaps too much, and he needed time to understand what was the way he could deal with Paris and the way he could deal with other artists and all the museums. I think that it is in Paris that he was able to become Picasso.
And become Picasso he did. During this time, Picasso began to grow and evolve in ways that would have an extraordinary impact on the art world.
And this, Le Bateau Lavoir, is a studio where Picasso painted during the years between 1904 and 1912.
I think Picasso is perhaps most famous for his innovation, along with Georges Braque, his best friend, in Cubism between about 1909 and 1914. The interesting thing is that art historians give Cubism the credit for perhaps the movement that truly made anything possible in art, but it's also true that perhaps it's the toughest movement in Picasso's body of work for viewers to appreciate. It's the subject or the movement we all know to respect, but perhaps find harder to love. Picasso's Cubism really starts as a form of expressionism. This is when he has the African art motifs overtly like the Mass in his work. But then he moves on to what's known as synthetic Cubism, which is much more decorative. But one of the great innovations of this period of Cubism is to actually incorporate real-life objects into the works. So that's one of the great innovations of Cubism. Cubism is an accumulation of moments in time that then create a more true likeness.
Picasso, life, work, and legacy will return.